Nurses say hospitals aren't prepared to handle Ebola patients, how Ebola is affecting the midterm elections, and our picks for Hero and Zero of the Week. All these stories and more coming up on The Rundown.
All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Ready, camera,
Talent.
Ready, camera.
Record.
3, 2, 1.
Record.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is The Rundown, where we run down some of the big stories making headlines. I'm your host, John Phillips. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is PJTV contributor Michelle Fields. And here in studio, we're joined by the columnist for the Washington Times, who you can read online at WashingtonTimes.com, Tammy Bruce. Now it's time to go to the top of the rundown. And Tammy, you're up first.
Well, top of my rundown, of course, is the big news here in this country. 2 nurses in Dallas have contracted Ebola. They both worked at the same hospital where the Ebola patient, patient 0, Eric Duncan, died this month. They were on his team providing him assistance. The first nurse who treated Duncan and got infected was Nina Pham. She's 26. She is currently receiving treatment. The second nurse is Amber Vinson. And get this, she was allowed to fly with an elevated temperature after calling the CDC and letting them know that she had symptoms. She didn't meet the requirement, however, of a temperature of 100.4. That's the cutoff point, apparently, for some reason. Nurses are saying that hospitals are not ready to handle Ebola patients. They say there is not enough protection, like fluid-resistant gowns and isolation rooms. Many also say they have not received any training when it comes to Ebola. Now, one of the nurses' unions representatives, you guys, said on Fox that the most training they got was a suggestion to watch a video. And that they were, in fact, we've learned, taping together some of the paper gowns. That there was no real complete head covers. Clearly not every hospital understands how to handle this, and that's not their fault. This is a unique, weird thing no one's ever had to handle. But the issue here, of course, also is the nature of what the CDC knows and doesn't know. John, I mean, isn't it an issue when we learn that Ms. Vinson got approval to fly? She was a primary caregiver of patient 0, was ill, had a temperature, and they tell her it's okay to fly. And the nation's been told by President Obama and Dr. Frieden of the CDC that you can't just get it standing next to someone, but the fact of the matter is, CDC's own guidelines indicate being within 3 feet of an infected person does put you at risk. What exactly is happening here?
Well, Dr. Frieden needs to go. Because when you have a crisis like this that could infect up to 10,000 people a month, which is what we've been hearing from certain projections, you have to be proactive, you have to be on top of it, and you have to nip it in the bud before innocent people die, which is, of course, what they failed to do when the whole AIDS epidemic broke out in the 1980s. The CDC appears to be completely and totally incompetent. They've lost the support, they've lost the confidence of the American people. Mm-hmm. The president had a press conference yesterday where he gets up and says, well, it appears as if we weren't as aggressive as we should have been in dealing with this. Well, that's the same thing you just said about ISIS. That's the same thing that you said about any number of threats that face this country. The border crisis caught you by surprise. Everything's caught you by surprise. Everything that goes on in Washington, D.C., he learns about from the news media. He doesn't learn about from his own intelligence, from the CDC.
Yeah, and then there's mixed messages, because he also said, I hugged one of the nurses who treated one of the first patients, suggesting that you can have that kind of physical contact when we know medically that is untrue. And Michelle, the first instinct of the CDC was to blame the nurses. With Nina Pham, they said there was a breakdown of a protocol, and that has not been proven. With Miss Vinson, they said, oh, obviously she did something she shouldn't have done when she was told it was okay to do it by the CDC. Is this with them just now finding, victimizing the victims even more to cover their own bottom in this case?
No, this is exactly what's happening. They know that they're at fault, that they look incompetent, and they're trying very hard to blame whoever they can. At first, they said it was budget cuts, obviously trying to insinuate that it's the Republicans' fault, that they had all these budget cuts that happened this year, and that's why this all happened. Now they're going after the nurses, which is not the nurses' fault. Like you said, this is a very unique situation. They haven't been in a situation like this before, and they didn't have the proper training. I mean, what is the point of having a CDC? This is their job, right? They're supposed to communicate with these local nurses and hospitals, telling them what they should and shouldn't be doing, and these people did not have the proper training and the proper equipment and gear to deal with this.
You know, and one of the arguments is to not stop flights, and they've got to start, forget about flights. It's about visas and it's about passports. You can stop people, effectively have a no-fly list. But they're saying that would be racist, the left is trying to make this political. As you see from the first two victims, they're women, and they're women of color. You're looking at people who are working within enclaves of immigrants, which is what we'll have with people who are coming in from West Africa. That's where they're going to tend to go. Those are the hospitals that will be affected. It will be nursing staff. It'll be primarily women and women of color. This transcends, and the obscenity of trying to make it about the usual political arguments about who's at fault. We've got to come together. Obama's got to realize he's in over his head. Somebody like Rudolph Giuliani needs to be brought in to manage some of this, but perhaps General Petraeus. They've got to go outside of their own circle. Do you agree, John?
Absolutely, and this leads me to the top of my rundown, where Ebola is impacting this year's midterm elections. Why? Well, both Republicans and Democrats are fighting over everything from flight restrictions to how to get rid of a victim's remains. Political strategists say it adds to the darkening public mood, considering what else is going on in the world. But Tammy, as we know, every election season has an October surprise. It seems to just work out that way. In 2006, in the midterms, the Mark Foley sex scandal popped up at the last possible second. That caused everything to turn away from the Republicans towards the Democrats. In 2000, Bush was comfortably ahead of Al Gore as we were marching towards that particular general election. Then the DUI arrest came out. That caused things to swing back in Gore's favor. In California, Meg Whitman was going to beat Jerry Brown in the election for governor. Then our pal Gloria Allred comes up with Nikki Diaz, and suddenly that election swings the other way. As of a week ago, the Republicans had a modest lead over the Democrats, but they hadn't yet pulled away. Since the Ebola outbreak happened, since this has been on the front page of every newspaper in the country, we've seen races. We've seen the race in Iowa. We've seen the race in Colorado. We've seen the race in Alaska. See a very different turn in the polls where the Republicans are starting to pull away. In states like New Hampshire, Scott Brown is coming back, leading in one recent poll. Is this the October surprise that Republicans have been looking for?
It'll be the first one in a while that was natural. It happened to be timing. This wasn't something that somebody was waiting for, like you knew of a scandal and you were waiting to have the press conference right at the right time. As far as we know, the Democrats have something lined up like that. We don't know. They might even still try to go with it. It's not going to matter. This is the natural trajectory of an administration and of a Washington, D.C. that does not know what it's doing, that has been winging it, that is not even necessary. As we know, Obama's not been interested in governing. This is the natural outturn, and the reason why it's helping Republicans, even though Republicans have been in Washington, is because what you see is what we've been afraid of now for years, which is that no one's really in charge, that Obama's been golfing, that this is now not just hyperbole, that you're looking at an environment now, when you think about arguing about how do you get rid of the infected clothing and medical waste, why is that even an issue? Why, if everything was fine in the beginning with Dr. Frieden and the CDC, why are they improving it? You mean there was room for improvement in the beginning, and why would that be? I mean, it's Americans are realizing that no one is home, and the people who are at home are amateurs and don't know what they're doing.
Michelle, you're in Washington, D.C. How shell-shocked are Democrats over this story? How concerned are they?
Well, very concerned. I mean, this coupled with ISIS is going to be really damaging come November, because whenever Americans feel as though their security, they don't feel very secure and the national security is at risk in the country, they tend to go towards Republicans who are going to keep the country safer. And this has the Obama administration's fingerprints all over it, because they did not take this seriously when it first happened. Just like with ISIS, they did not take ISIS very seriously. And with both situations, they've come out and they've been very, very bad.
You know, one of the questions, which no Republican will ask, but this is the question for the American people. Do you feel more likely to get your head cut off or more likely to get a hemorrhagic fever now than you did 6 years ago? And everybody knows what the answer to that is. It's going to be pretty awful, but it's a reflection. It's a black swan in that we couldn't have predicted exactly Ebola or exactly ISIS, but it's exactly what happens when you have a person who does not know how to be president, and the entire agency system reflects that.
And I'll tell you why it especially stings. If you're the party of government and you're not competent at running
Right,
government,
right.
that's a big problem.
That's it, and that's what has to be used by conservatives from now on. This is the example of what happens when people think government has all the answers.
All right, Michelle, what do you have for us?
At the top of my rundown, 167,000 convicted criminal aliens are missing here in the U.S. According to the Department of Homeland Security, those convicted criminal immigrants have final orders of removal and are currently at large. 900,000 illegal aliens have received a final notice of removal in fall. Deportations have dropped 34% this year as well. What do you make of this story, John? Do you think this is going to be a big issue going into the November elections as well, the issue of immigration?
I wish it was, but I think at the core, the left just doesn't believe in borders. They really don't. If you look at the criticism, I hate to take everything back to Ebola, but if you look at the criticism of the hospital in Dallas or the response where the governor down there, Rick Perry, has been blamed for this, the fact that it's a red state and a private hospital by Joy-Ann Reid on MSNBC has been blamed for this. But the guy wasn't a citizen. And part of their criticism was, well, he didn't have free health care. He didn't have health insurance. Well, he's not an American citizen. So why would we give him health care? But they were apocalyptic at the fact that he didn't just get off the plane and we gave him a Kaiser card. And ultimately, that's the crux of their argument, that we should pay for health care, not just for American citizens, but for anyone who wants to come here.
Well, and you know, look, this is what's interesting is we've just found out we've given $1 million, Michelle, to the Mexican government for their programs to stop gender discrimination in Mexico. There is this attitude that there is no border, that they are now just proceeding, but this is the pretend fantasy world of the Obama administration of Democrats. We've seen what it gets us. It is chaos. This is a debacle at every level. The thing is, though, while it's like immigration is already baked in to what Americans are thinking, and if these other two things weren't happening, this would be a huge issue, in addition to its relationship, as Cheryl Atkinson is now reporting, possibly to the enterovirus D68 spread, which has killed more people in this country than Ebola and is continuing to roll along. Americans know it. It might not be in the news, but I think it's baked into the reaction in November.
All right, now it's time to move on for Zero or Hero. And this is where we pick a person or group for doing something very good or very bad. And Michelle, you're up first.
My zero is U2 frontman Bono for making us listen to his music. The singer says his group may have gotten a little carried away with the release of Songs of Innocence. That album showed up on millions of people's iClouds, whether they wanted it to or not. Bono said in an online question and answer session that he's sorry he got carried away with his beautiful idea. But now there are tons of tutorials online, and Apple's website now has a special page to try to explain to you how to remove all of the music from your iPhone. So if you don't want it, you can figure out how to do it online.
There is a hoax going around this week that Bono got Ebola.
Oh,
And
no.
I bet you he's never been happier to have that hoax going around so that way it can deflect attention from this hideous song.
People want to buy stuff. They have the value. They don't like things like forced on them no matter what it is, even if it was good. You know, they want the value of buying. They don't want to feel like, oh, this is now assigned to you as your music. Nobody likes that, even if it was good.
My zero is Arkansas Senator Mark Pryor. Pryor is in a tense re-election fight against Republican Congressman Tom Cotton. This past week, a gay rights leader was caught on hidden camera saying the Democratic senator, who publicly is against gay marriage, actually supports it privately. So public position, different than private positions. That's not all that was said. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Well, I support traditional marriage, and I've been pretty clear on that for a long time.
But he says he's against it.
He's just like, you know, it's not something we can talk about. I'm not against it. If you tell anyone I told you that, I'm going to find you and kill you. But,
So there you go, another coward in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
Just be
same thing
honest
with
about what your
Grimes.
position is.
Yeah, the thing with Grimes and the coal in Kentucky, this is what politicians tend to do. I love the hidden cameras because now we find out about it.
There you go. Tammy, you're up next.
My hero is a 15-year-old boy who, talk about cameras, from Las Vegas who wasn't afraid to show off his moves during a live television news broadcast. Brendan Jordan seized the spotlight as a reporter was talking about the grand opening of a new shopping mall, and that is worth getting excited about. During the report, you can see the teen dance like nobody is watching, except, of course, everyone was. There he goes. Okay. That's what normally you just do in the bedroom in front of the mirror. He stole the limelight from everyone else around him as he posed, and he got an interview with the Today Show. He said he saw the camera and just did his thing. That's what happens these days. You see the camera and you go for it. He went on to say that he was imagining himself as if he were Lady Gaga and that no one could destroy him. All right, well, you might not want to do that in certain parts of town because you know there might be problems. However, the diva dancing guy has gone viral, as you might imagine, so it's good stuff. Good for him. Good first experience with a camera.
Sweet Brown was able to take being on the local news and turn it into a career.
Yeah, look, that's it's fun. We like seeing people feeling comfortable with themselves, having a good time, and we've got now a generation that knows what to do with a camera.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. What do you think about our picks for Hero or Zero of the Week? We want to know what you think, so be sure to leave your comments in the comments section below. I'm John Phillips for Tammy Bruce, joining me here in Los Angeles, and Michelle Fields in the nation's capital. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.